Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him two lips like roses and clover, and tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone, don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
Good evening and welcome to Nox Mente. Tonight's guest is Stephen Crimi. Steve has a degree in English literature from Union College and spent over a decade in traditional yoga study at Yoga Anand Ashram in Amityville, New York. He's been previously published by Moksha Journal and Journal of Anthroposophy in Australia. He's done time as an editor, state gardener, cook, massage therapist, and most recently running a biodynamic garden and fiber farm, Philosophy Farm, for 12 years with his wife of 3 decades, Krys. They now live in the city of Asheville, North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina, where they continue to garden and midwife literature. Stephen was born in Brooklyn and raised in the streets of Ozone Park, New York City. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's very nice to have you here, Steve. I'm honored that you're taking the time, you and your wife. This is going to be a great episode. I just know it.
Okay, well now the pressure's on, but thank you. You guys run late. I was thinking that maybe, I was almost like in the dream state myself at this point. So
yeah, we want to get you right on the edge.
Thanks. But thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And so let's get started. Good.
Absolutely. So tell us about the world you grew up in and give us a focus on the early life.
Okay, so I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in Bushwick, which is apparently now the trendiest place in Brooklyn to live. But I think it was a lot less trendy for a long time. And I guess I was there for maybe 2 years, and then at some point, my parents moved into an apartment above my grandmother's house in Ozone Park, Queens. I think some of my earliest memories, but probably in Brooklyn, so it must have been before I was 2, was being like wheeled in a carriage to where a train crossing was. I seem to have some fondness for trains, and as it turned out, the apartment in Ozone Park, Queens, was half a block from the A train, the elevated A train. So the sound of trains running through my consciousness has been kind of constant, and even here in Asheville, they're running by all the time. So I grew up in so Ozone Park, Queens is a very, the diversity of Ozone Park, Queens was basically, they had Italian Catholics and Irish Catholics and German Catholics. And that was pretty much the extent of it. And really wasn't until later that I understood it as pretty much a mafia-controlled neighborhood. But it was a really good place to grow up, playing on the streets with your friends, ball on the streets, stickball, wiffle ball, all that kind of stuff. So, it was a pretty good childhood, except for, I guess there's a lot of, bullies and things like that. And you just kind of, it was just part of growing up that, had to know when to cross the street, when you saw some people coming the other way, things like that. And I went to a Catholic school, which unfortunately kind of squashed my interest in learning. I was I don't want to use the word prodigy, but I came in reading, actually. So I don't remember learning to read, but according to my mother, I had a library card at 3, which I think is kind of early. So
that's great.
So I was that was some of my earliest memories, and that was my big joy, was to go into the library and picking out books to bring home. And I remember it was like always disappointing because weren't there that often, and I think they had a limit of 5 or 3, and somehow I guess I have a vague memory of being told I was like the youngest person in New York to have a library card, but I think I'm making that up. I think that's one of those distorted old memories. It may have been the youngest person in that particular library.
That still ties into all this, how memory is.
Not to mention, it's almost impossible to disprove, so don't worry about it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But it's part of creating your own legend in your mind, I guess. So, but that was some of my earliest and fondest memory was going there, and I remember the two things that there were books for me to take out about were space and astronomy and dinosaurs. So I was big into dinosaurs, and actually my first remembered dream, probably around this time, was of a Tyrannosaurus Rex walking up the block, and that one I can still actually picture vividly. Do
you remember that enough to tell us about it?
No, I don't remember anything else other than it was coming up the block from where the elevated train was, and along this sort of big brick sort of industrial building that was on the corner there. So it took place in the world that I inhabited, except that it was a large Tyrannosaurus Rex coming up the street. I don't remember anything else from it, so I must have been preschool, but I can't remember exactly when it was.
That's great, though, to have a dream recall from that period.
Yeah, I don't seem to have anyone else, but that was certainly the first one I remember. And I guess what happened was, I went to a Catholic school and was taught by nuns, and I was, generally pretty, good, shy kid, so I didn't get beat up that much, but everybody got beat up at one point or another. It was just de rigueur. So, and never too bad. But I think what happened, there was 50 kids in a class, and now I understand much more that that discipline back then was back then it seemed onerous, but if I had 50 inner city kids in a class, I might be thinking differently about what getting through my day. But what happened was I lost. Because I guess I was a little ahead of everyone else, I really just completely lost interest in learning because they were, teaching to sort of the midline there, and I probably would have been better off in a public school. But that there was all these fears around going to public schools, and who else would other races would be in those public schools and things like that. So
and you have to go to CCD, right?
It's kind of CCD, which is
the Catholicism shit they do at public schools on Sundays. It's like Sunday school for public kids. Right.
I have to spend another day. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So luckily we had our Catholic training, in class, on a regular basis. We had novenas on Wednesday, which is where I first learned to have pain in my knees from. It was like kneeling the whole time. And that was like the Wednesday afternoon thing, but and I did know enough not to become an altar boy. Somehow I intuited that. So
was the religion at all significant to you, or was it just something you had to play part in because it was kind of cultural there?
Right. I think. Well, it was. Well, the Italian. I had 3 Sicilian grandparents. They were all born in Sicily, and so nobody was really serious about religion. They're much more serious about holidays and family and things like that.
Yeah.
So and very early on, so at a certain point, my parents stopped going to church, and they would send me with the envelope, and then at a certain point, then what happened was I just said, screw this, because what happened was as a kid, you're so tuned in to hypocrisy,
right.
And talking about, the peace and turning the other cheek and all these wonderful sayings of Christ, and then beating the crap out of you, just didn't
Yes.
jive. So I just stopped going, and I would just take the money and go to like, I don't think McDonald's existed then. I was born in '58, so this would have been,
Very entrepreneurial of you.
60s, I would just go buy a hamburger and fries and then come home and pretend I went to church.
Rebel, rebel.
You know, so I did, for a brief time, I did like what was called the Hootenanny Mass or the folk mass, because there was a brief time where I enjoyed singing in that. But that was it. So, you know, the religious indoctrination was there, but none of it really made sense to me growing up. You know, it didn't have any sort of basis in reality. It was so abstract, and it didn't, you know, and there was no teachings of anything real or anything. You know, there was nothing esoteric going on back then anyway. You know, unless you know, obviously I wasn't going to be reading, you know, beat writers at 7 at that point.
Yeah. Do you, on this strain, do you have anything you visit in the spiritual pool now?
Anything from then?
No, how has this transformed? Are you spiritual at all now, or have religion in your life in any way?
Well, yes, because, you know, in the end, I mean, I guess maybe by the time I got to college and there were certain, you know, theogenic experiences, that suddenly there was an experience that made sense.
Yes.
In terms of that, and then, you know, I fell in with this group of people, and you know, and people, you know, tossing back and forth, you know, the Tao Te Ching and Aldous Huxley and Castaneda and all that stuff going on back then. So he got interested in that, and interested into those kinds of experiences that eventually led, as Jerry read before, spent 11 years in a traditional yoga ashram on Long Island where we live, and that was a very fortuitous event because it was a traditional spiritual education that we got. Okay. So it wasn't just meditating and asanas, but it was learning Sanskrit and learning, you know, so reading the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutra in the Sanskrit, rather than reading other people's interpretation of them, and then of course doing the practices, and you know, so embodying those texts in that way. And I guess I was there for about 11 years, and I had some, you know, wonderful experiences, and some, that's a whole other story, but it reached a point where I felt that, you know, we were always just, you know, bowing and saying namaste to each other in the ashram, and it just felt false. It felt completely false because I'm not a Hindu. It's really not my tradition.
Yes.
And where I went from there is an exploration of the Western tradition, because I'm a Westerner. I'm not a Hindu. And that's and trying to understand the sacred origins of Western culture, which have been completely buried over. And people don't even realize that we have one. So, you know, like Native American people, God bless them, they've been trampled on, but to a certain extent, they know what they've lost. But we don't even know that we've lost anything as a culture. So,
yeah, I completely agree with this.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I agree. It's something I've noticed, especially with Native Americans in particular, have kept an oral tradition.
Right. So I've always had, you know, some sort of spiritual drive, and it's probably something I came in with, and like I said, growing up in, you know, in a situation where really none of that was helped along at all in any way. So it just kind of slept for a long time until I guess really hit my college years, and you know, a number of things happened that helped that along. So then follow that with more traditional studies, and then you know, then working within the Western tradition with what we call incubation. And I don't know if we want to get into that now, or we can get into that some other point.
Okay, yeah, let's move on a little to, so what this kind of almost feels like well, first of all, I wanted to ask about this, but I want to use this as a transition later and not now. But in what changed your path in context what we're talking about now, if there was some sort of altered state or event that had happened. But let's put that on the back shelf now. I'd like to know what sign you and Krys are. Your signs.
We're actually, it's fun because we're actually perfectly opposite ends. So I'm May 24th, Gemini,
Taurus.
and she's November 26th, Sagittarius. And so, and then she also has Gemini rising, and I also have Gemini rising. So there's a whole mess of us here.
Oh, I have Gemini rising also. It's excellent.
So, so we're actually exactly 6 months apart, which I think makes for a good compliment. And it's actually running jokes between us, because she's extremely Jupiterian and will be very expansive and doing 17 to 100 jobs all at once, and just bouncing from one to the next. And I'm much more methodical, I start, finish it, move on to the next thing.
Well, it's obviously working. This is a good coupling.
Yeah, it worked. We just hit 30 years this past year.
Congratulations on that. I look
totally.
up to couples that are working.
It's worked. It's worked from the beginning. After we got the riffraff out of the way and got together. Our first date was a month of backpacking in Turkey in 1985.
Oh wow! What a way! There's a way to really get the projections down and see a person for who they are.
Right, and it was Krys's first trip out of the country, and I had been to Turkey before, and Turkey's a magical place, and I'm kind of heartbroken about what's been going on there. But
I'm devastated over it. It's sad, so sad.
And we're just huge lovers of the country and the people, and
Yes.
we do Airbnb, and we learned hospitality really from the Turks.
Yeah, it's a beautiful. So in this, and just on this background stuff in the beginning, have you done psychedelics? And the focus here is altered states of consciousness. Now, psychedelics bring that, but with a focus towards continuity in not partying, let me put it that way, with something that feels like more other, something significant.
Consciousness exploration versus recreational use.
Right. Well, let me preface this that when I was in college, and when I first started doing the it was mostly the LSD and mushrooms at that point. But I also joined this very old secret society, quote unquote, that had a very traditional initiation, and it's actually the precursor to the entire fraternity system in this country. It was founded. I went to Union College in Schenectady, New York, and it was founded there in 1825. And I don't know really how it evolved to what it was, but it was actually a real initiation. And that was a real turning point for me for understanding.
Are you able to share any tidbits about that?
Well, no, for a couple of reasons. But the main reason in that is that it's an experience.
Yeah.
And you can't really, you can say, yeah, well, I can talk about samadhi or something like that.
Yeah.
Certain experiences that you've had. But I can say that the traditional initiations have always been, life, death, rebirth experiences.
Yeah, of course.
So, right. So like one of the things that Christianity is so fucked up is that it's the initiation stops for most Christians with the dead guy on the cross. Right. It doesn't continue to the resurrection body, to any understanding of what happened. And an arrested initiation is worse than no initiation whatsoever.
Yeah. No, talk about that. That's those are some true words.
Yeah, so that's really, I think, one of the big problems with it. And of course, you got people who are working with initiating young people because they realize, that talking about when you lost the initial fountain of a culture, that's part of it. So you have people like Martine Prechtel, and there's some people here, young people here trying to do that because the initiation is absolutely crucial. But it's hard because you don't have a cultural context to do it within.
Right.
And you're doing it actually contra the cultural context. And, and so what happens in this country, what's the initiation? Well, initiation is the military. And the military is an initiation into death instead of the initiation into life. And so that's another reason that everything is just, you can talk about the inversions of this particular world right now, all day long.
Well, even to a lesser degree, it's that whole paradigm of, go to college and then get that job and get the whole, whatever they tried to pawn off as the American dream is kind of has masked as a set of gateways to how your life should be. And it's such a thin veneer with no meaning.
Yes, and it's hard to break from that. I mean, and like I said, I was the first person in my family history to go away to college. So there was all that pressure to be some sort of professional. And I was like, 45 years old. My mom was still there. Well, you could still go to law school,
Oh, no.
It's over. I'm a freaking poet,
Yes, yep.
It's over. But I guess there was always hope for her somewhere.
Well, there was a period when it was a different kind of experience, when university actually was about higher learning and expanded learning, and there was more of a there was more to it. Now it's more like a machine. You go through it, and it's just expected. It's easier to get in. They let anyone in, and it was more based on credential as far as your academic understanding of things.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we could talk about this for hours too.
Yeah, and I caught the very end of that, and I can almost, it was almost like the day I could see, and the event was Reagan's election. We're talking about casting spells. A spell was cast that day too. I could feel it. I was actually doing a radio show that night in college, and I didn't really understand what was happening, but the demons got in the grid that night, and and then all of a sudden everyone was an economics major.
Yep.
No one was there studying finding a passion and then studying it.
Right.
So
those days are gone, Steve.
Yeah, I
those days.
They're in my little head, at least,
Yeah, they're living in fable now.
To get back to the question about taking entheogens, and yes, and the group of people that I was associated with were much more aligned with the Ken Kesey Yahoo West Coast version of that, of taking psychedelics. And in fact, we actually put on what may have been like the last whatchamacallit, not being acid test, where we just did this wild multi-dimensional gathering for like 300 people who were all tripping.
Was Krys there too?
What's that?
Was Krys there too?
No, okay. This was before I met Krys when I was 25. Yes.
Okay.
It was after college. So most of the people that I was with at that time, there was a little bit of that, kind of, going off in the woods and navel gazing or something. But for the most part, it was very party oriented, and it was really a waste. And there's really only very little you can learn, about anything from that point. And acid itself is problematic, I think, too. But maybe the acid that I was getting in the late 70s, which was probably stepped on by the mob. There was always a lot of speed in it.
Yeah.
And it was never, I never got, like the Owsley. I mean, I got into it because I wanted to see rhinoceroses coming out of the wall.
Yeah. But mushrooms were are a different experience, and so surely you had to have gotten more depth from that.
Much more organic, much more somatic. You know, you just I remember, I remember once doing some. It was before something else. I guess I was about to. I guess I was with the college radio station. It was a softball game against another local radio station, and I remember just taking some beforehand, knowing that I'd be doing something else later. But it was just sort of coming on, and I remember I was doing in batting practice, and Terrence McKenna talks about this. You know, that small amounts, you know, increase visual acuity and hand-eye coordination. And that was one of his theories as to, you know, as to you know, evolution of the people who were taking them. But I was able to take a batting practice pitch and take a pitch from anywhere and hit it to anyone who I wanted to, exactly.
Wow.
You know, and I said, wow, this is amazing. You know, that lasted for a while, and then the game started. I was playing center field, and then I couldn't follow the ball anymore, so I had to leave. But you know, but I can at least attest to that aspect of it.
Excellent.
But yeah, but you know what's really important is the unit of experience, I think, that comes out from that, and then it's just, you know, it just permeates your whole experience. You know, that there's some sort of substrate, what we call in yoga prakriti, which is the base element of the divine feminine, that runs through all of experience all the time. And you know, if you meditate a lot, you just, you know, you fall in and out of it because, you know, you have to navigate the world, but it permeates all of our experience. And so that once, if you're in that state and you've had those conditions, you can call on it, you know, when needed, or you know, you can forget about it if you want to get pissed off at somebody. You know, like my favorite Alan Watts thing was something along the lines of, you know, realizing the essential unity even with somebody that you're arguing with, and say, you know, he would say, "Oh, Shiva, old boy, you know, you've disguised yourself well this time." So he's very articulate. So yeah, so the mushrooms were yeah. So there was mushroom. There was, you know, in those days, you know, and there was Quaaludes, which was, you know, a great way to miss a party. And that was short-lived. I didn't do that more than maybe once because it was just really just turned you into a giant idiotic penis is what basically what it turned you into.
Oh, Lord.
You know, it's just like banging into walls, you know, because you only have one eye or something, a cyclops or something.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So anyway, so that was very formative, and then probably not much after college. Go ahead.
Did any of your experiences with substances that induce altered states of consciousness at all have any familiarity with like when you're dreaming and being in a dream state? And this includes like astral stuff as well as luminal and hypnagogic and all that.
Well, yeah. So this is a large road. During the time, can I get into the paralysis here, or you want to?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So for a long time, it may have started when I was in high school. It could have. I can't remember when it started, but it lasted for a good number of years, and I would say, on the average of once a week, maybe once every other week, I would wake up with the feeling that this would be on my back. There would be a huge pressure of some kind holding me immobile. And I would all I would know in that state was that all I would have to do to break the spell was to move, but I couldn't move. And that was the essential conundrum. And this happened over and over, and obviously the spell broke because, you know, I'm not still paralyzed somewhere. So, but that would happen over and over and over again, and almost always when I was sleeping on my back. And
Was there fear involved?
A little bit, but not a lot. Mostly, it was because because you were clear and conscious, and it was just mostly and it felt like it was coming from the outside. It didn't feel like my body was not moving. It felt like it was being held down.
Okay, that's a little bit, that could be, I could see some fear being involved in that myself.
Right, but then it happened often enough where it was like, oh, this again.
Okay.
It happened for over a number of years. And then it culminated really, and I don't know if this may have been the last time it happened. After college, I was living with some friends in Providence, Rhode Island, and they were going to RISD, and I was engaged in my failed attempt to become a writer, or to make a living at being a writer anyway. And one of these times, I woke up being held down, except that this time there was, I had my hands out, and in my left hand, there was a being holding my hand.
Oh, wow. Can you describe that?
Well, I can, and actually, it's really interesting because I told my friend about this, who was back in college a year before, who was reading Moby Dick, and there's actually a chapter called The Counterpane, where Melville describes this exactly, just kind of out of nowhere. So I'm assuming it's something that happened to him, otherwise, because it really doesn't fit in with chasing whales all that much. But it's a chapter called The Counterpane. I recommend anyone who has a dusty cover on their shelf somewhere to find it. But it's basically the same experience. So I woke up, except that it was obviously a female presence, and it was in telepathic communication with me. It was probably one of only 2 times I've experienced telepathic communication, and the other time was on mescaline. But this female. So since I was in telepathic communication, well, I asked her who she was, and she said, "You know who I am?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't know who you are." And she said, "Yes, you know who I am." And then some sort of name or word came, and I really couldn't quite make it. I think it started with an S, but it really was hard to understand. And I perceived her to fly out the window. And that was it.
And so, okay, and this was after years of this going on?
Right, and it had, pretty much dissipated by that point because I was out of college, and it was fairly infrequent at that point. And I'm pretty sure that's the last time it happened. But I was paralyzed. But except talk about fear. Once she let go, first of all, it felt like something wholly other.
Yes.
So it just felt like that. I mean, that's the only way I can describe her. It was something wholly other. And after the experience, I was in bed, waking up in the morning, and I basically like curled up, in something like a fetal position for about 20 minutes before I could get up. So it affected me very strongly.
It sounds, I'm sure, I'm just going to say, it sounds a bit like a classical succubi.
Very much so.
And detachment from such.
And what? Yeah.
And detaching from it.
Yes.
When you say goodbye.
Well, yeah. Well, it's hard to know. There may be more to the story. Because it seems like, if you want to hear the rest of it.
Yes, please.
So many years later, when I was doing the healing work, I was still living in New York, so this would have been late 90s. So this experience happened in 81, 82, something like that. And then there was a woman that we would do, so I told her I did massage work. And she would do, we would work on each other every other week or something like that. We would do work on each other. And she was from Haifa, Israeli woman. She was a bit of a psychic. And she said, there's this woman that keeps on hanging around you. And so I was trying to find out, try to get some information about it, somehow immediately, connected it with the experience in Providence. And it went on, it just went on, but she kind of like got a name like Sangre, which is some version of the word blood. And I've always had curiosity about, I don't have no brothers and sisters, but I had a sister who was born exactly 2 years after me, same birthday, who only lived part of a day.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is, then the reason she died was because when I was born, I had a different RH than my mom. So that when I was born, all these antibodies went to her bloodstream. And that's basically, they suppress it now. They have ways of suppressing it now, but maybe at the time, this would have been 1960. They didn't. I don't know. My mother claims that the doctor screwed up, and I don't know the details of the whole thing. But, one possible scenario was that it was my blood that killed my sister.
Okay? Oh, wow.
Which is maybe the dark way of interpreting.
Are you RH negative?
No, positive.
Okay.
I'm positive.
So I know I've heard of that killing other kids blood-wise.
I'm pretty sure. At least that's what's on my.
But there's a dark link here with another same birthday and all this.
Right.
Is significant.
Right. So I'm thinking. So that's what came to my head. I still have. To this day, I still have no idea what really happened. But then, fairly soon after that, just weird things started happening in our house. Things disappearing. Just weird things disappearing, like the top of a tall kitchen garbage can disappearing. Money disappearing, but clocks would stop. There was all sorts of weird stuff going on. I don't know what that was. It was like for about a month. Something like that. And then, so we had, at the time, Krys and I had an umbrella cockatoo.
So wait, was Krys experiencing this stuff also? The garbage lid and all that? Okay.
Oh, yes, the missing things.
Yeah, the missing stuff. Yeah,
that stuff. Okay, so you had like agreement in there on that.
Yeah, it wasn't. No, I'm not. I know you're nuts, but I'm not totally nuts. So, and we had this umbrella cockatoo who was just the most amazing animal ever. And it would come into in the morning. It would open up the louver doors and pop into bed with us and hang out and usually like eat our clothing or something.
Oh my God, that's too cute.
Yeah, he was all the person, and we've had farm animals, we've had everything. Took all the personality of all of our pets together, and it's not even close to the personality of this little bird. But so one morning we wake up and he's staring at the clock where all this, time has stopped and all this problem. And he just goes into this shriek. His it's an umbrella, it's a cockatoo, so they have that crest that stands up to make themselves twice as big, and his wings are out, and he's screaming at the clock.
Yeah, they're loud too.
Oh no, there's nothing like it. So, and I know it's her. And this is something I don't know if I could replicate this again, but I know it's her, and I just say to her mentally, I'll meet you in a dream state. And I fall right back asleep. And I go into this, I have this weird dream. So the dream takes place back at my college and at the mailroom of my college. So I'm walking, because I know, so I'm walking into the building, which is called Carnegie Hall. And I go into the mailroom, and it's also one of my recurring dreams is like mailrooms and not remembering combinations, and high school lockers and not remembering combinations. I have those all the time, or I used to. So I go into the mailroom, and there was this bizarre scene of this baby with an astronaut's helmet on in a shopping cart.
Oh, strange.
And I think the helmet comes off. Somehow I see her, and I ask her who she is. And again, I get the same thing. I guess you know who I am. And I asked her like 3 times because that's the ritual. 3 times you're supposed to get an answer out of 3 times, and then disappeared, and that's the end of the story.
Do you think this is connected to your sister of the same birthday?
I think it might be. I still think it might be, and I've never really gotten, nothing else happened after that. And I don't know, or it may have been something attaching itself to me through her.
Yes.
I don't know.
Even through the idea of that, by just thinking about it being a dark chain, almost connects or makes a pathway in which something could attach to you through that.
I think that's entirely possible. I think it's entirely possible. So, yeah. So, like I said, I still don't know to this day if it had something to do. I'm feeling like it does, but and that was yeah, yeah. And so, like I said, the name was kind of like the word for blood, so it makes some kind of sense. But then again, it never gave me the answer of telling me how I know who it is, or how I know it from, or where I know it from. So it's just one of those, mysteries that keep things kind of interesting on this side of the veil.
Yes, indeed. That's incredible. And that it was so long lived too.
Right. Well, there was a lacuna of several decades, and then
Yeah.
yeah, who knows? There may be a coda somewhere. I'm approaching 60, so who knows? There's still time for more fun, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, there's plenty of time. So, all right, give us an idea of your general dream landscape. So, colors, sight, sound, sensate, all of that, and just a wide scooping swatch here.
Yeah, right. So my general, yeah, I have, I don't think I think all my senses are open in dreams. I don't recall ever smelling anything in a dream, but certainly they're almost always in fairly vivid color, and there are levels. There are the more what you call it, brighter, what do you call it, the lucid. Thank you. Lucid dreams that where everything is a little brighter or almost even hyper bright in a lucid dream. But for the most part, all my senses are available. I've had a fairly rich dream life for the most part, and and then there was this recent space, and we can talk about that too, where the dream shifted, and they seem to have started to shift back now.
Would you mind going into that now?
Right. So there was, and we moved we were living on a farm out in the country up until 2011. Then we bought a house in the city of Asheville. And about a month after we moved in, they installed the smart meter. And the one of the first things that happened with the smart meter, I hadn't had an infection the year before my ear. One of the first things that happened, I lost my hearing and developed tinnitus. The smart meter is right under our bed.
Oh my God.
And it took me a year to get the hearing back in my ear. And the dreams shifted, and I stopped almost entirely having narrative dreams where, you have a scene, whether it's, most dreams have an element of surreality to them, but they're narrative. They follow, a path, something happens. I stopped having the narrative dreams, and I started having what I can only call process dreams. And they are impossible to describe because I'd wake up and I'd try to tell Krys about them. And I can't describe them at all. But there are certain experiences, it feels like having a computer program running inside you, or to be inside a computer program. Now, some of them were morphing, and they were all just like repeating morphing things. Just they might involve a pattern. It might involve something like a pattern, but usually they're fairly amorphous. There'd be some sort of field, something be happening, and it'd be happening over and over again. And I would wake up and I'd fall back asleep, and it would still happen again and again and again. And it was really disconcerting because, I done a fair amount of research on the situation with AI, and if I have to pick the one thing that we're up against, that's the make or break for humanity, it's AI. And I just, I don't know. Am I nuts, or is there some sort of AI entity trying to mess with my consciousness?
Make or break in which way?
Yeah, right. Either way, right? So, right. It's right. So, which way are we going to go? I mean, we're either going to be. I mean, right. Everything is pointing towards, what we call before full spectrum dominance. We talked about, we got heavily chemtrails yesterday. I mean, the worst chemtrails we've ever seen. There, So, is there a program? Obviously, I don't get the memo. I can only guess. But to me, it seems like the chemtrails, the seeding of the skies, the nanoparticles, they're all meant to infiltrate our consciousness and to be a control mechanism.
Yes, I'm in that direction as well.
Or it's or it's terraforming.
But it's terraforming nonetheless.
Right.
Regardless.
It's all it's the same end as far as I can tell. So I had so my paranoid side, which paranoia can be healthy, was saying, well, is there something trying to infiltrate me and trying to take over and make whatever botany or something like that. I don't know if it's a verb.
Borg you.
Right. So
assimilate would be the verb.
Yeah, and I kind of missed that whole. Like, we haven't had TV for ever, so really. So I kind of missed the whole Star Trek second generation thing. But
you didn't miss much.
I get the concept, Cube and all that.
It's all just a different form of programming.
But it's as well, and that one was predicted, isn't it? So anyway, so these dreams have been going on for a very long time, and recently, because of trying to figure out what we can do, we've tried a bunch of things that have helped, but not. We're talking about with the smart meter. There's a thing called there's a system called biogeometry. There are a number of people that are making products that seem to they're designed to help with alleviating the effects of the smart meters and the effects of the Wi-Fi. But the thing that seemed to turn the trick was this particular substance called shungite, which is
yes, I'm wearing some right now.
I have a chunk of it next to my bed.
Okay, so you come across it good. So,
yes.
So we bought these sort of stickers that go on the meter from a place called Cosmic Reality, and that morning, plus I was having lots of trouble sleeping too, and I was having some health issues too with my prostate, etc. But I would it was like up all night, all the time, having a lot of trouble sleeping. So that went on for a number of years, which is really neat. So that was interfering with it also. The first time we put the shungite on, that morning I remembered 6 narrative dreams waking up.
Oh wow!
So I was like, okay, something shifted here.
Yes, there's something to this.
And since then, which was 3 months ago, I guess. Yeah, so about 3 months ago, say, maybe more, but about that. So for the most part, I've only had 1 or 2 times, but for the most part, I'm not dreaming a lot, but I am dreaming. I had one last night. So it's kind of like back to normal, where you remember some dreams, but I'm back to having narrative dreams again, which I'm very grateful for.
I was thinking it could be that the shungite is somehow blocking the EMF that could have been affecting your dreams prior.
Yes, prior to
you
The
acquiring it?
smart meter.
yes, and actually, so a couple of people. We have a friend who works with heavily with, and his whole life is dedicated to understanding gems. And what does he call it? I think it's something like a warrior stone. It has a really, really strong protective element about you. And in fact, we have a friend. We go to a friend who does something called plant spirit medicine, which works with, as it says, plant spirits, and also works with the traditional Chinese medical system, with the working the pulses and clearing them. And so the first time I was wearing it, and I went to him, he couldn't work on me until I took it off. It was
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was like
That makes sense.
That much of a
He was
shield.
so protective of me,
Yes.
and since then he is able to, but I kind of I tell it beforehand, it's okay, we can let some good plant spirit energy in.
I also
interesting.
enjoy the benefits of the Q link as well. And it's helped me tremendously. I feel sensitive to these waves, and the smart meters, of course, have gone through every town, right? It's part of the agenda. And they put it on my house without my knowing, and then I threw a fit and somehow was able to do that. But they're everywhere around me, and the Q link has really brought back a sense of clarity in my head in a different way. And I don't work for these people. I don't.
What's a Q link?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that. I haven't heard of it.
Oh, I highly recommend it. Jerry's looking it up right now.
As opposed to QAnon.
Right, as opposed to QAnon. I highly, it's a lot of athletes use it, but it sets the biofield also, and it's based on old Tesla technology. There is one that is literally based off of the Tesla model. But this is all, I digress on this. And Jerry will screen share it so the four of us can see it. But aside from that, I want to get back to the dreams. So this is a question more for Kristen, I think. In all these years, does Steve sleep, walk, or talk at all?
No.
So he's a silent sleeper.
He is, yeah. Very rarely.
Krys talks a little bit.
Very rarely.
We're turning the tables on you, Krys.
It would be very rare for him to even mumble. But no, I would have to say no.
Okay. That it's always interesting to know, and it's good to hear from someone who would know, because a lot of people have to just speculate that we are our guests. Okay, so I want to get your view on the differences between lucid dreaming and astral projection, and these states of consciousness directly attributed to dreaming. So the out of body stuff. We know you've lucid dream. You have those. Have you had these others? And what are trigger points? What are the correlations?
I was only had one out of body, and I was in college, and I was really tired and not getting much sleep, and I was trying to take an afternoon nap. It was probably during finals or something like that, and I did. I just lay down for a quick nap, and then I just heard all these tones. Actually, for a while at that point too, I was also hearing a lot of tones, and I think that also may have been associated with the sleep paralysis. Come to think of it. But I just heard a bunch of tones, and then I just kind of shot out of my body to the ceiling and kind of just said, okay. And well, how do I get back in? And
That was it?
Kind of floated back in. Yeah, it wasn't visual. I just knew I was up there.
Yes.
I knew I was out of my body, but I didn't see anything. So, and I just knew I kind of floated back down into it. And I also wanted to mention too that part of my studies of the Western tradition and so my understanding of dreams is that they're they're no more or less real than this realm. This realm that there is what is what Henri Corbin termed the imaginal realm. And so I think there's a close correlation or overlap between the dreamscape and the imaginal world and the world of the gods, really, and the goddesses. And so, you know, and we've been very much students of the Greek tradition, and they were involved heavily in a practice called incubation. And incubation is it's like, if you do any yoga, everyone knows the corpse pose, the shavasana.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's basically, and we had actually our teacher who founded the ashram we belonged to. She was from Calcutta, and she would say the corpse pose is the most difficult pose to master. And everyone would giggle, but the reason being is because it takes absolute, complete, and total surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always like on to the next pose, or, you know, whatever. You're never in absolute surrender. So the Greek tradition, and this goes back to the title of my book, Katabatic Wind, which is all about the underworld deities. And you know, the tradition was, you would, like Pythagoras, you would lie down in absolute stillness and you would sink into the underworld. And that's the area of the dark chthonic world where of the divine feminine, you know, the caves, the things like that.
Mm-hmm.
All the temples, they had underground precincts, and what would happen there. So the priests and the priestesses would incubate, and then they would get their messages from the deity, mostly through dreams. And then also through the Asclepions, which were, Asclepius was the Greek deity of healing. And what would happen there is similar. You would either go there and dream. We were actually, 2 years ago, we went to an Asclepion in Turkey. After 30 years, we took a trip back to Turkey for a few weeks and had a wonderful time. And we went to an Asclepion, which is mostly still there, and they actually still had the incubation chambers where you would lie down to sleep and dream, and you would get a message from Asclepius on having to do with healing. If you got time for a good story about that?
Yes.
So there's this is actually like, you know, carved out in stone in the records of one of the Asclepions, not the one we went to, but another one. And what happened was, you know, so a lot of the reasons that the women went to them, there would be difficulty getting pregnant. So this woman goes and she goes into one of these incubation chambers, and so she has a dream, and Asclepius comes. And Asclepius comes and says, well, hello, you know, what can we do for you? He says, well, Asclepius, you know, I'm having all this trouble getting pregnant. And he says, that's not a problem. Is anything else you want? No, I want to get pregnant. So sure enough, she leaves and she becomes pregnant. So 2 years go by and she's still pregnant. She goes back to the Asclepion
2 years.
and says, and this is like carved out in stones. This is great. So she goes back to the Asclepion and says, he goes back into the incubation chamber, and he says, oh yeah, I remember you. How are you? He says, well, you know, I came and I got pregnant, but I want to give birth. Well, he says, why didn't you tell me you wanted to give birth? You know, so go ahead, you know, and so she gave birth. So that's actually in the records. But it also points to this whole other thing that in all these traditions of being literal in that world, you know, in your communication with the deities and all that, you have to be really literal,
precise. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So it's really it's really interesting. So there's that aspect of the tradition that we followed, and when we were working in that tradition, you know, dreams were extremely important, and dreams were, like I said, as real. And you know, many other cultures, mostly Aboriginal cultures, who understand this very well, that the dream world and this world, the dream world and this world are really the same.
Yes, I think so too.
There's the separation is, you know, is due to our habits and you know, the world that we construct.
Yeah, it's a thin membrane of perception.
Our belief systems too.
Exactly. It's our beliefs that make these worlds solid, that these walls are solid. You know? But there's
and our shared ideas. of it.
Right. So that's that's why it takes it takes entheogens to break that. An ayahuasca journey or something like that, because we just reached we're really at the most physical that we can be as a species. But I think but it's part of a cycle, and I think we've just reached the bottom, and it's time for the pendulum. It's going to start swinging the other way, and that's part of why these entheogens are around, and they're what it takes to break down what we've got generations of of this solidity that we have to break through.
So what do you think about deja vu? Do you have them? And when you have them, what's your experience with deja vu, and what do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I can't say I think about it a lot. I just have it on occasion. Sometimes I wonder if it's past life. I usually have it with people.
Oh, interesting.
I usually have it with, we've danced somewhere before, So that's more or less where I have it. And sometimes I think because when I have paid attention to it, sometimes there are patterns that repeat themselves.
Yes.
Patterns of perception, patterns of experience, and I maybe it locks onto another one, but it's never, and it's never like I get a full memory of anything that passed, and I certainly have no memories of any past lives or anything like that. I've never had that kind of thing happen to me. Yeah.
What about, and this is for you and Krys, so in your dream lives, how much entanglement do the two of you have? How much do you encounter Krys? How much does Krys have dreams with you? And how much are you conscious of it?
I have lots of dreams with Krys. I have one this morning with Krys. She often accompanies me in my dreams.
But are you both aware of it afterwards, though?
No.
Okay.
No, are we aware of it?
Yeah, like
the dreams occurring. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, all of this.
Afterwards, I was curious about specifically. Like, do you know that you were dreaming with him, and he remembers that you were in there? Okay.
No, we just it's kind of usually it's our ritual to wake up and and
any
ask,
good dreams today.
and go into the dreamscape. That's been our pretty much every day for 30 years we've been doing that.
I love that. I love that.
The dreams.
Yeah.
Well, that's created like a sacred space if you actually acknowledge that, and that's as good as writing it down.
Yeah,
it's very helpful.
It's true, and we both keep dream journals. We both have them, and I was actually, I was doing some homework and trying to go through some of my dream journals, see if there's anything to talk about. But so there is. Often, they share the dreamscape with her, and every once in a while, one of us gets mad at the other.
I seem to be like, I was so mad at you last night in my dream.
From the dream, you'll wake up and you're yes.
Yeah. God, so mad at you.
Yeah, I guess it's because we never argue, so.
Yeah, you have to there, I suppose.
I guess so.
So
it's kind of funny.
Yeah, so I've always just taken them, extremely seriously in that way, at least in terms of understanding what's going on. You have different levels. You have dreams that are just come at the right time to tell you what you need to know. For example, at one point when I was doing a lot of the dream work, I had this dream of being in a museum. And all the curators of the museum there was a woman who was like kind of running the show, and they were all just in this other room interested in fundraising, things like that. But but I snuck in, and somehow I knew that there was this sheet of diamonds in the wall of the museum.
Oh, wow.
And so I walked in and I tore open the wall, and it was like a whole sheet of diamonds on, kind of stuck to, I don't know, something like a piece of paper, I guess. And I rolled it up, put it in my jacket pocket, and left the museum with the diamonds in my pocket. So, so a couple of interesting things about that. But, so on one hand, I'm trying to, basically as my work is to try to pull, what's real and valuable out from this sort of, what's left, which is only a museum of Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently I have to be a thief to do it.
Oh, well, there's a lot of occult in that.
Yeah, okay. And then we were working with someone named Peter Kingsley at the time, and he kept on saying, well, what are you going to do with the diamonds? What are you going to do with the diamonds? And it was like years later, I was actually in incubating, and a voice came to me and said, the diamonds are to be given away. So that's kind of when I started writing my book.
Oh,
were they cut diamonds
really?
or raw?
I think they were cut in large.
There's like no way you would know what type of cut it was, would you?
There's no way.
Okay.
The geography of it, or
just
not
reminded
geometry.
Me, yeah, the geometry is important. I've heard this research from Tracy Twyman talking about the path that light takes through a diamond, through the facets, the angles that it takes, have magical qualities to them.
Right. And there's like I think there's some of the traditional Rosicrucian stuff points to everything is like a 12-sided, it has 12 facets to it.
Yeah, dodecahedron. Right?
Yeah, dodecahedron. Yeah, and we were actually lucky. We studied with someone named Keith Critchlow. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's like the kind of the incarnation of Pythagoras. He's this huge sacred geometry guy.
I'm familiar with him, yes.
Yeah, so we actually were able to study with him. He came, we had a sacred geometry study group here in Asheville for a while, and we brought him over, and we did 2 long weekends really, of drawings. That was completely transporting. So talk about, changing your perception of abilities, and you would just, everywhere you looked, you just saw the geometries everywhere that were inherent in everything. And
once you see, once you see, you see. It's such a strange phenomenon.
It's like trying to get unred pilled,
Yeah.
Yes.
Good luck.
And studying Chartres.
And then we spent a week in Chartres with him, Chartres Cathedral in France, which is.
Oh. So did I.
What's that?
So did I.
Did you?
Really?
Mm-hmm. So I had an amazing experience with the Belvedere. It's one of the windows. I don't know if you recall it, but it was.
I remember the big round one.
Yeah. So those. So part of being there for the week, we would draw those windows, do the geometry behind them, and then you'd go and meditate in there. And then actually, one night we actually had the place to ourselves, and were able to, got the chairs off of the labyrinth and walked with candles around the labyrinth, shut off all the lights, and we're able to walk the labyrinth. But the most magical aspect of it. The stained glass windows that are in Chartres, no one knows how to make them anymore. They're all made in like the 10th and the 11th century, not the 10th, but the 11th century. And how they're made, no one knows, because there's a quality about those stained glass windows, the oldest ones, where, so if you shine a light through most stained glass windows, through a red piece of glass, it'll show up red on the other side. But none of these old windows have light, it's a pearlized light that comes through.
Yeah,
so there's actually a transmutation going on.
It's like a diffusion almost.
Yeah,
but
yes. Yeah, so it's like a pearlized light that comes through. And when you shut off all the lights in the cathedral and there's nothing but, there was still enough light in the sky, this pearlized light suffused the building. And it was magical.
So it comes through
Sounds
Pearl
gorgeous.
white.
Yeah, it doesn't come through as colors. Actually, this is a picture that Keith Critchell took. I don't know how much you can see it, but
Nope, that's
no,
not
it's
going
nice.
to help.
Anyway, that's a picture.
Oh, I
he took.
see it a little bit. Yes.
Let's get it a little bit.
It's kind of hard. Anyway, this is not much for the audience.
I
Though.
don't know.
Yeah, because we don't have video for the audience. Not on the audience, no.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Okay.
but he caught something happening with that window, and I had an experience. If you don't mind, a mystical experience.
We love them. We're here for that.
So I was meditating at this particular window. It's called the Belvedere. It's one of the oldest ones. It's of Mary, and actually there are. If you look at the window itself, the whole ground floor of the cathedral is superimposed on it. And there's all sorts of work being done with the ground, and there's two towers at Sharp. One is lunar, one is 365 feet, and the other is a lunar number, which I can't remember off the top of my head. And there's nobody buried in it. It's a cathedral to life, cathedral to the divine feminine, cathedral to Mary. So we had like the afternoon off, and they had this bench where you can look up at the stained glass windows, and the cathedral's huge. Actually, you actually need binoculars to see the windows.
Oh, wow.
So you have to get a good look at them. So I'm looking through the binoculars, and I have, I'm far nearsighted, and looking at the binoculars, and so the red and the blue of this particular window pulled out from it, and just was floating in front of the window. So the red and blue glass that made up Mary's body just came out from the window itself, and then like I'm putting the binoculars on, taking them off, and I'm like, holy shit, what's going on here?
Yes.
And it still, it stayed, and then I just had this experience of infinite grace, and I understood the line, "Hail Mary, full of grace."
Oh.
It was just, and it lasted for a few hours of this just feeling of being enveloped in complete and blissful and total grace from the Mother. And it's one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. So I can say that she still lives there. It's still her house. It's one of the most, magical places, and I probably consider it the apex of Western art. Is that cathedral? It's really a pretty special place.
That's incredible. I have an affinity. I wasn't brought up in any religion, but I came to a deep affinity towards Mary and of Sorrows, all of them, and through an encounter of a Polish Mary that has her dress made up a yoni.
Oh.
And I have one in I have lots of Marys all over my house. And I had an experience like that too. It was just hard to explain, but sacred feminine, and there she is, and she's still empowered and imbued and in present. It's still there. So yeah, that gave me goosebumps listening to that story.
And that young.
Me too.
Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
What was that about Pisces?
The Vesica Pisces, which is actually
the yoni, is the Vesica Pisces.
Yep.
Yes,
that's what all creation comes through, that portal.
Yes, and that's her. That's that energy. It's like it's
Right.
completely that. And so, yeah, people with their hang-ups don't get past that. That they don't understand it. They see indoctrinated religion instead of what's actually really there. In my experience, and like I always say I wasn't brought up religious at all. So she found me, that divine feminine found me through these images.
Yeah. And all of my all of my mystical experiences, and none of them have been on drugs. Were of the feminine aspect of the divine.
Yeah. Oh, and the Black Madonna. Oh, so much there.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to get, while we're still in Nox Mente, I want to ask you about any kind of prophetic dreaming. And this goes to, all these questions can go towards Krys as well.
Yeah. Well,
it's-
I just wanted to show this to Nish.
yeah.
oh my
Yeah,
God,
that's
amazing.
the portal, I think. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, so actually, well, this is short and sweet, but I'm glad you asked because I almost forgot about this one. Yeah, so when I was in college, this was in like 78, 79, I had a dream of a tombstone with my name on it. What's that?
Okay, I thought you were going to talk about the God of God.
Oh, yeah, I had a 9/11 prophetic dream too, but this was I had a dream of a tombstone. It was a regular tombstone in a cemetery. It's kind of wide, and there was my name on it, and it was the date, May 1st, 1985. So this would have been about 7 years earlier. So so I just wrote it in my dream journal, and didn't really think too much about it. I really wasn't thinking about it as an actual end date. You know, why the hell would I be getting that information? Didn't make any sense. But as it turned out, so the way Krys and I got together is we met at work at the psychiatric hospital that I was at for a while, and turned out that we like I said, we made this. We were going to go someplace else, but it turned out that Turkey was affordable for us, so we decided to take this trip to Turkey, and we just went through all the details, and it turned out the flight left on May 1st, 1985. So I didn't tell her about the dream until we were in the air.
Oh my God.
Oh, by the way, I had this dream. I think, I figured I might as well tell her, just in case it happened.
That's intense.
So so my old life ended and my new life with her began that day.
Wow, that's powerful. I've got the goosebumps again here. Hold down my arm. That's intense.
So so that's really sweet. So so that was one prophetic dream.
It's super romantic. The romantic in me is always alive. So this is just
good. Keep that alive. Keep that alive.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That whole trip was a dream.
Yeah, it was just a wonderful thing. There was it's kind of interesting. So there's a place near here called Grandfather Mountain. It's one of the most sacred mountains in the area, maybe the most, in at least in my experience. And it's about for the East Coast, it's pretty. For the east of Mississippi, it's about 6,800 feet. It's not quite as tall as Mount Mitchell. But it's called Grandfather Mountain because as you pass one side of it, it has the face of an old profile of an old Indian looking up, and it's really quite spectacular. So we were there one day with a friend, and it was a couple of days before the towers fell at 9/11, and I was just sitting there meditating on the peak. They have this sort of swinging bridge. You go out to this one peak and commune with the crows and the ravens. And so I was meditating, but it wasn't really going anywhere. So I said, well, Grandfather, would you grant me a dream? And that night, I had a dream of being in a bookstore in Boone, which is not that far from Grandfather Mountain. And I was being led to a book, and on the spine of the book was Gog and Magog. And then right now, if there was more of the dream, I can't remember. There was something about to needing that book, and so Gog, and I did a little looking at Gog and Magog were these sort of two pillars at the kind of at the edge of Scythia, which at the time was like the edge of the known world. It was kind of a gateway to something, and with a couple of days later, the towers were taken down, and the spell of Gog and Magog was cast on this country.
Mm-hmm. I can't help but remember that that George Bush thought he was the reincarnation of Gog, and
no shit,
really?
and Hussein, what was his name? Saddam was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar, and that they had an age-old battle to fight. And this story went around back then.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember hearing that.
I'll try and find some source for you.
Yeah.
So that furthers your dream.
Wow.
Yeah, well, so that's I think that's probably the limit of my of my prophecy. I wouldn't,
Yeah, but those are very significant, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot more really, I'm interested in, and of course, because this ties in, we're talking about altered states and dimensions of consciousness and stuff. So clearly we have the ability to tap into all that is. And so these are two amazing, solid hits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been, like I said, I've been very fortunate in my dream life. I've been fortunate, with having certain, experiences of the divine, and in the end, that's what drives me and what gets me through the day, gets me to write. When I try to write, I'm always trying to write from, not about.
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm hoping that comes through in what I write. That some trace of those experiences come through. I think good writers, when you read certain things, that you can just taste experiences behind them sometimes.
Absolutely. I look for the visceral when I'm especially looking at things like creative writing and poetry.
Mm-hmm.
So moving into kind of the last bit of Nox Mente, what are your ideas of consciousness? And we can tie this right into death too. So where are we? What is consciousness? What is really all of what's going on with death? What's going on? How does it connect with dreams and memory and timelines? What are your thoughts? I know that's a big question.
It is a big question, and consciousness is it's a tough word for me because I've spent so much time studying, working within a particular tradition, and consciousness is used differently than it's generally bandied about. Everybody talking about raising consciousness and all this sort of stuff. And I have to confess, I'm really not sure what people mean half that time, where we're ascending to this, that, or the other thing. And like I said, I confess I'm not really sure what people mean. My understanding, certainly from the tradition and from my experience, is that there's two aspects of experiences from the divine level, and the divine masculine, divine feminine. Divine feminine is the manifestation side of the experience, and the divine masculine is the awareness or the consciousness within that experience. And both of them are absolutely necessary for experience to exist. And that's all there is. That's all there is. There's nothing else. There's no, and this is my experience, that there is no world out there. There's no world out there pre-existing for me to walk upon. The earth is made, with every step I take, the earth is generated through me. So all of that comes through me. And if that's what consciousness is, then that's what consciousness is. I'm not sure what consciousness is, being conscious within the experience, So to an certain extent, everything's an illusion. Everything's a dream.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an actual physical solid world out there. I can bang on the desk, but in actuality, it's just the experience of banging on a desk.
In actuality, you're not even touching it.
No.
Because it's the electrical resistance between the two materials of your hand and the wood that makes
a possibility too.
Yeah.
But but in the my understanding of oneness, and the world is born through you continuously. And I don't know how that works with, for example, what you said, whether, it works on a certain level. But for me, my understanding is that, everything's an illusion at its basis. So what reality is an illusion. But there's no reality outside of that that it's an illusion of. Does that make some kind of sense? So
100% perfect.
Yeah. So our job is really of navigation. How do we navigate this world? And with keeping in mind that everything, and you spend all your day thinking, Trump's this, Jeff Sessions is that, and we, it's still hard to hold on to that, core vision of what life is through it. And that's why these experiences are just so essential. And, going back to initiations and all that, I mean, this just gives you taste of these things. And that's maybe that's the best we can hope for, So as far as death goes, as far as I can tell, there is no such thing as death. That, it's some sort of transmutation. I don't know really what survives. I can't imagine that my stupid personality is going to survive, because my personality is a construct too. You had the experiences where it's just, you just realize that what you think is you is a friggin' joke. And I've actually, cracked up at it. It's just like, sometimes it's just like so funny what you think you are, So, and then if you're not that, then you're something divine or some aspect of the divine. And it, and I think you got to get closer to that if you once you pass on to into whatever's next, or whether this dissipates, because again, I think that world and this world are completely interpenetrated, but we don't see it.
Yes,
it's occluded from us, unless like I said, you have these certain experiences,
occulted even.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have no questions. No one's got any questions.
I think that's a lovely place to pause on Nox. Are you going to be able to do an after show with us where we get into some of the woo-woo?
If you'd like.
Because you brought all kinds of woo-woo to the table that I'd like to get into. We're talking chemtrails, biofields, smart meters,
AI.
sim theory. This is all our after show stuff.
Well, I'd be happy to continue the discussion.
Excellent. So we'll do the wrap up on the live show, which is going to happen right now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Krys. It's been nice having you here.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone who's watching. And Steve,
I
was going to ask you, if we got anything to plug? Go for it.
Plug my publishing company.
Do it.
Logosophia Books. We have a publishing company, amazing books. And, check it out. It's logosophiabooks.com, LOGOSOPHIABOOKS. So the Logos and the Sophia. So it's the divine male and female in there. And we have, 13 or 14 books, and I highly recommend them. They're all of the spiritual bent.
Some are even dreamlike.
Some
like
are
Lonely in the Heart of the World.
We have, So please check that out, and thank you to anyone who's listened. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
We will have all this information attached to this video.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. And thank you, everyone, for watching or listening, or however you're ingesting this. Next week we have Adam Loyal from the Friends to Know podcast. He's a pretty interesting dude. Definitely will be a good talk. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.